Welcome everyone to our first live broadcast at NZ Big Game Fishing, where we look to bring to you every month interviews and educational pieces from the game fishing fraternity. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Lance Mannins, founder at NZ Big Game Fishing, which was kicked off way back in 2010 with a view to bringing together in one site a central resource for everything that was happening within the NZ game fishing scene. Also behind the scenes today, we have my co-partner with NZ Big Game Fishing, Keza, who's working to make sure that we don't have too many screw-ups today with all the graphics and the graphs and everything else that's going to be happening. So no pressure on that, matey. I'm sure he'll be doing a fantastic job. So look, this month we wish to welcome Steve Campbell, who is a very well-known sport fishing captain in New Zealand and also in South Pacific waters. He is probably best known for his sport fishing business, Blue Marlin Sport Fishing Adventures, where he has been based out of Vav'au in Tonga since 2000. Steve and his clients have now caught 2,412 Blue Marlin as at the end of 2020, 96% of which have been released, which is an outstanding record. He has skippered or caught 174 Tongan and club line class records together with 44 all tackle records. Steve has also published Blue Marlin Magic. So for those of you that have had a chance to get a hold of this copy, which unfortunately isn't available as far as I'm aware in New Zealand at the moment, it is an amazing book. It's the most comprehensive compilation of catch data yet to be published on Blue Marlin. The book also features fishing techniques and detailed observations on Blue Marlin behavioural traits, which presents a wealth of information back to anglers. So welcome, Steve.
Yeah, thanks very much, and hi to everyone.
Yeah,
nice
good
to be back in New Zealand for a while.
So just really quickly, it is really good to see you back in New Zealand. Why are you in New Zealand and not in Tonga at the moment? Or is that a silly question?
I came back in July 2020 to catch up with my mum, who's 95 years old, and unfortunately the Tonga border got closed and I can't get back. So I'm basically like a tourist waiting to get back to Tonga.
Right.
Boat's up on the hard, and I have to say I'm doing it a bit hard, not being on that nice water.
Yep.
But it is what it is.
And so the plans to get back to Tonga, is that kind of all, obviously it's COVID and Omicron based, you're thinking you're going to be able to get that back there soon, or is that going to be client based as well?
I think it's going to be a little while yet, a bit unknown with what's going to happen with Omicron, but the Tongan population are around about sort of 80% fully vaxxed now. Yep. So a big announcement will be made in March, and I'm pretty hopeful that we can get back maybe mid-year. So fingers crossed.
Right. Well, welcome to NZ Big Game Fishing. Hopefully we, have a good crew on board tonight to catch up with you and hopefully what will be a pretty good introduction to your Blue Marlin fishery and what you've learnt. So just a few little introductions and announcements. We've got a pretty cool prize pack tonight, which care of Hooker Fishing Tackle. We've got a new lure. It's the Big Owl in Blumo, which is a new color combination, blue outer skirt over Lumo, and a cap, which we're going to give away tonight. And Steve, you're going to give that away to the person that's going to come up with the best question in the Q&A a little later on. So look, if the crew that come on board tonight, just let us know where you're coming from around the country, from overseas. We'd like to know where you're listening from. So just put that in the comments box where you're listening from tonight. That would be really cool. So we'll be giving that away. So the format for tonight is we're going to have a catch up with Steve as to where this whole journey started. Then we're going to dive into Blue Marlin Magic, the book, and the data that's come out of that over the last 10 years or so. And then at the end, we're going to have a bit of a Q&A. So through the next half hour to 3/4 of an hour, when we're running through all that info, just start posting up your questions. Kieran in the background is going to be collating those, and then we'll be asking those, or answering those, should I say, as we kind of move along. So if we see that some of those questions might be relevant to the discussion that we are having, then we'll post those and ask those of Steve at the same time. So yeah, look, let's get cracking.
Very good.
So yeah, look, where did this whole journey start, Steve?
I think like most Kiwi kids, we're on an island and it's pretty hard to get away from the water. And I think I was quite fortunate that my parents were outdoor people. And so I was fishing from a very, very young age. We had a holiday home at Stillwater, and I was around about 7 or 8 when I got my first boat. And I used to spend hour after hour paddling up and down the Wade River, catching fish. And from there, we ended up with family boats. Dad was a very good fisherman. Spent a lot of time on the water together. And from there, it sort of went through the normal transition of inshore fish and then, bigger fish. And then by the time I sort of got to my sort of early 20s, I was into game fishing. And my first real sort of solid patch at game fishing was with Bob Ash. And at that stage, I was posted in the UK, so I'd come back and we'd have the boat for a couple of weeks. And I learned a hell of a lot from Bob. He recently deceased, a big shame for the whole fishing community. He was a very, very astute and very smart fisherman, and he taught me a lot. And I'm eternally grateful for being under his wing, and also his son Chris.
So that was Anita Rose in the 1990s type thing?
Yeah, that was Anita Rose. Yep. When I was posted overseas, I then did fishing all around the world, and fished Madeira a lot in the States. And it just got to the point where I knew that I was in the wrong occupation. I actually wanted to charter, and lucky enough to make that happen in 1998 with real passion. And I've basically been fishing ever since. And and the enthusiasm and the majestic blue, I'm still in awe of it. I can't get enough of it. Yeah.
So those early days of game fishing in New Zealand, was that what, Bay of Islands and Three Kings and Middlesex and those types of areas?
Mainly the Bay of Islands, and then around Three Kings and Middlesex, and also a little bit further the Gobi. So we spent a lot of time up there.
Lure fishing?
It was we were basically lure fishing as well as baiting, and we sort of, like most Kiwis, you learn by lots and lots of mistakes. I think the real difference that it made is when we made a decision to extend our fishing season. So we, at the end of 1998, we took off to the South Pacific, and after that, I was ruined for life. I just wanted to go and set up somewhere in the South Pacific. I just loved the climate and the water and the fish. I mean, fish everywhere, and great topography and structure to work with. Yeah.
So just tell us a little bit about those early days with real passion and the first trips, up into the South Pacific and Samoa and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, well, I sort of made a decision to extend the business actually into the South Pacific and maybe run both New Zealand and the South Pacific. But in actual fact, in the South Pacific, you can actually run a business pretty much 9-10 months of the year. We catch marlin every month of the year. But we got invited by the Samoan Tourist Department to go up and do a little bit of a survey for them on the potential for sport fishing. And that came about because at the time they had something like 54 longliners operating out of Apia. And so we went up there and we spent, quite a few months. The fishing was okay. We actually put the first fads in that they'd had. We managed to put a couple of fads in for them. And then on the way back, we fished some seamounts and went through to Tonga. And we didn't really have enough time to have a really good look at Tonga. And at that stage, I had definitely made a decision that I was going to shift base. So I came back the next year, and we ended up getting a beautiful little position inside a lagoon. And that's when the Vav'au status happened. It was sort of full time. 2000, I think I moved up there, and we had a few scares with cyclones and stuff to start off, which was a bit of a kick in the guts. But my first season up there, we caught 148 blue marlin, and I knew that's where I needed to be. People quite often ask me, why would you choose Vav'au or Tonga? And pretty much it was based on the geographical location of Vav'au. It actually lies perfectly for our trade winds, and even in 25 to 30 knots, I can still fish in 1,100 meters of water, quite often in the lead. Yep. So it's a pretty laid back, not a particularly progressive country, but I don't get too involved in all the politics and stuff, and I just keep to my fishing. And I'm very grateful that I can work up there, and it's a wonderful fishery. And I think certainly it's in the sort of top 10 in the world, no question, on blue marlin.
Wonderful. So those early years with Bob and Co, and then Real Passion, you did it. Did you do a couple of trips up with John Going, or the Goings, or was that just the initial...
John Going actually came up on my maiden voyage.
Yep.
And he didn't bring up Delray that year.
Yep.
He had a local boat called Makyra. So John was great to fish with. I just hope that in my older years I'm as competitive as John is.
Totally.
He's a very competitive guy, and he's a very, very good fisherman.
Yep.
And not only that, just his basic knowledge, navigation, little tricks, engineering. He's got it all. So a lot of respect for John Going.
So one thing you talked about was those few trips that you did up there is how it changed your fishing when you came back to New Zealand and got back into the blues down here. Even those initial trips kind of changed how you fished down here. So what were those initial things that you learned up at the Pacific that you implemented down here?
Well, we thought we did pretty well in Real Passion our first year in New Zealand. I think we ended up with 106 fish in New Zealand that 1998, and then when we got to the South Pacific, we got our ass kicked a bit. We dropped a lot of fish, mainly blues, and it always intrigued me. They're certainly a very different animal. I've always used the analogy that a striped marlin is pretty much like a souped up, Mini Cooper S, and the old blue marlin is a bloody Lamborghini. And you have to change your style. So after a while, we started to learn how to catch blue marlin. Just changes in the way that our speed, the sort of lures we were running, the sort of rigs we were running, and using very, very light drag. So after our first year in South Pacific, and we came back to New Zealand, I sold Real Passion, and we got the Caribbean 45, and that was Real Obsession. And I wasn't able to fish for a while, so a few of us, Chris and Davey Goodless and Shane Matheson, we had about 2 to 3 months of just playing around.
Yep.
And we caught a lot of blue marlin that year, before the season even really got kicked off. So it was just basically taking what we'd learnt from the South Pacific and applying it to the local environment. And the reason that, I guess what we could say is that if someone hands you a chart and you have a good look at the chart, especially a bathymetric chart, I think if you understand how billfish feed and the sort of base that they're operating from, you can most likely have a look on that chart and pick a couple of areas and say, that's where I'm going to go fishing. And it's quite often related to structure, and in particular, convergent current, finding out where the bait is, and doing your basic homework, really. One thing that we did in particular, which I think is really important for people who are starting out in game fishing, is go to an area if you've done your homework and stay there all day. You've got to be able to fish in between the tides to really get a good feel for an area and look at the current and all that sort of thing. Quite often a lot of people would get to an area and they get a bit bored after a couple of hours and then they take off. But you know, sometimes you waste a bit of time, but you learn a lot more about that particular area, especially if you've got a pretty good feel that it's going to hold, you know, billfish.
Yeah, the grass is always greener. So the reason we've chucked that graphic up there is this blue that was caught down in the Hawke's Bay, and as much as we don't necessarily know exactly where it was landed, it's in that general area. And when you actually start having a look at the structure through there, you know, you can see that there's a heap of structure through there, which is kind of what you were talking about.
Yeah, pretty much it's structure and current. And also, you know, personal observation is great. I mean, I've been lucky enough in the boats that I've had, you know, quite sophisticated sonar and sounders that can read to 1,500 meters and all that. But quite honestly, personal observation fills in lots of the gaps. Just as an example, every day I go out, including now, I still will fill a page, an A4 page full of observations. And then when I get home, I'll actually put various subsections of that into one of 6 spreadsheets that I run. And then I can pull it together. And what I'm actually looking for is subsets of variables that actually come together. And if you can do that, you'll end up actually being a little bit more successful, in particular in finding them first. Catching them sometimes is a bit different, but at least you can find them. Yeah.
Cool. Hey, I'm just going to read an excerpt, should I say, from the publisher for Blue Marlin Magic, and we'll kind of get cracking into that. So Blue Marlin Magic is the book that you published how many years ago, Steve? 3, 4, 5 years ago?
I published that in 2014, I think it was, yeah.
Okay, all right. So in the initial forward for the book, Steve points out that blue marlin are precise, not crash and bash predators. From watching hours of video, he learned details about how marlin light up before they strike. Others intentionally build the lure, but never appeared to have any intention of biting. Some took a look and veered away. Still others followed closely for a long time, shifting from lure to lure. Perhaps the most significant discovery Steve made from his underwater video study involved details about precise, predictable paths of attacking blue marlin, which is probably one of the points that really stood out for me. So, you know, this video study that you did, was that the initial basis for the book, or was that kind of just one part of all this observation?
I think it was a very important part of it, because while you've got the visual, when you're actually looking from a fly bridge, everything happens in split seconds, and you can't really tell exactly what's happened. So we ran the fisheye camera, and I'd go home each night, and then I'd actually go through it all and watch frame by frame and watch how they bite. So it wasn't just the bite process; it was actually the whole spectrum of when they come into your gear and at what depth they're in the gear, and are they single or are they together? And after a while, you actually do get a good feel for how they hunt, you know.
So that single animal versus packs of marlin was something, I found really interesting when we chatted the other day. They're not necessarily solitary predators, are they?
Absolutely not. No, they're definitely not. I mean, I was picking up on my sonar, 5 and 6 blue marlin working together. No question. I could actually watch them work together and having turns, very, very disciplined. And quite often, when I'm running the camera, a marlin would come in, and in the peripheral you'll see 3, 4, or 5 other marlin. Quite often, much bigger marlin, but that first marlin would be the one that would bite. Yep. Occasionally we'd get doubles or trebles. But the one thing that still I can't work out is what their pecking order is, because quite often the fish that bites is smaller, and you would think that like in the animal kingdom, the more aggressive, bigger fish would bite first, but that's not necessarily with blue marlin for whatever reason. I'll keep trying to work it out.
Cool. So, and when we talk about classic blue marlin habitat, what you learned in Tonga and how you maybe can apply that here in New Zealand, when you talk about working structure and raising fish from structure and bits and pieces, can you maybe talk a little bit about the learnings from Tonga and maybe how we might be able to apply that into our classic kind of blue marlin fishery here?
Yeah, New Zealand's got some very good structure to work up north. Places like the King Bank and the Middlesex Bank, but all, Paringa, all the way up, basically, is lots and lots of structure. And
apparently down in the Hawke's Bay as well, Steve.
Yeah. I'm quite sure that there are areas of blue marlin that are yet to be discovered. What I found in the sort of structure base that I'm working with in a place like Tonga, it's much more dramatic. But it put a focus on concurrent currents. And as an example, down the South Bank, it's 19 miles long, and it all looks pretty much the same, but there's only 6 places that actually hold marlin as opposed to transit marlin. So if you can actually work out where marlin are holding, you're going to be a lot more successful. And the way that you can do that, obviously, is you do your homework on a chart, find the right sort of structure, maybe working off drop-offs, a drop-off, anything from sort of 250, 400, 500, 600. Closer the contours, the better. Stronger the current, the better. And go there and actually work it, and actually work into the current and also back. Now, quite often the current changes, and one thing that I did to help me understand current is that I was using tie-dye aluminium dye canisters, and I would poke a hole in them and stick them on a little cardboard boat, stick it in the water, and I could actually see the current, which way the current's running. And quite often I'd actually would have made a mistake on the current. So looking at current's very, very important. And what I found is that I like to find a nice current split. One side of warmer water, the other side colder water, and quite often you'd find that the bait will be on the warm side and the marlin will be on the colder side. And what they do is they go in and out feeding. They don't stay with the bait, and the reason they don't stay with the bait is that they'll break the school up and it'll sound, and then they're going to have to spend a lot of energy getting that school back together again. And I think when you look at the anatomy and physiology of blue marlin, they are absolute masters of conserving energy, and it's all about survival. So when you come to a place like the Middlesex or whatever, you've got beautiful, beautiful country to work with. I think you just need to be patient, work the tides, be observant in terms of current, temperature breaks, and keep a really good eye on all the bird life. I've actually done a very detailed study on birds, and pretty much in Tonga, when I see a group of birds, I'm pretty good at actually picking exactly what's underneath them. I'll give you an example. 2 May together, the white May birds, always on May. Then you'll have a combination of May birds and terns, and they'll be on skipjack or kawakawa. Then you'll see some booby gannets just diving, and they'll be usually on things like, yellowfin. And then we've got a grey back tern only associated with yellowfin. It's amazing just how much information you can get, from the rest of the food web that's there. Makes it easy.
Nice. So when you're working through behavioural traits and bits and pieces, and you're working through this whole flight direction, that whole revelation around that, what was the big change from your point of view in terms of how you were managing boat and strikes and bits and pieces? I thought that was a really interesting concept that you developed.
I think that sort of changed the dynamics on improving your catch. Absolutely dramatic. To test that, with colleagues and that, I'd say, that marlin we had in the gear this morning, and remember what lure it was, and the guy goes, I think it was the long rigger. I said, was it on the inside or the outside? I don't know. Well, most people don't know. It happened so fast. So when I was running my cameras, I'd actually be able to see quite a few shots where the vast majority of blue marlin came on the inside of the pattern,
mm-hmm.
and they roll their body slightly to increase their arc of sweep and bite, and they go out into clear water.
Mm-hmm.
So that either happens on the starboard side or on the port side, and it is very, very predictable. Every now and again you get a rogue one, but that's not the majority. So if you know that happens, what we did is we started to offset our hooks about 10 degrees facing into the wash,
mm-hmm.
and our hookup rate got very, very good. I mean, we're averaging around about 80 to 81% hookup rate with lures, and that worldwide, that's pretty much as best as it gets. But that was a great revolution, and when you look at the dynamics of that, the same thing happens when you've got multiple bites, and it's all part of the survival instinct of blue marlin. There's no question about that. It's built into their genes, and I personally believe that before the marlin has even bit the lure,
mm-hmm.
they have an exit strategy. The exit strategy, because you've got to remember that they are most vulnerable themselves, being predators, when they're about to attack something else, because they're so focused. So they've already made a decision. They whack the lure, bite it, hook up, and they go out into clear water. It's very predictable. So you can modify what you do and how you set your lures just by that anatomy and physiology response that blue marlin have. Yep. And also striped marlin. I mean, the one primary difference between the stripies and blue marlin is that blue marlin very rarely ever come over the top of the lure from behind. They always come up along the side, and the reason they do that is that their bill structure is quite wide, and they have lateral placed eyes. So when they get close to something, they've got bipolar vision. They can't see. So they have to move over to one side. And the blue marlin is so classic in doing it. They'll move to one side, they've got a good eye on it, and then they do their roll and bite. And as an example, you've got a 200 to 300 kilo blue, and he comes in on the long rigger, and he hardly breaks the surface. And you say, how is that possible? And it's because of this roll and pitch that they do. Yeah.
And this is
pretty
where
cool.
you feel that these fish are either left or kind of right eye dominant, so they'll come in and either take a right or a left lure. Is that
they've got a
strategy?
So yeah, sort of. I mean, I haven't been able to really prove it, but just based on the catch statistics, fish, they come in on the left and they come in on the right, but they still do the same behaviour. The only time they don't exhibit that is usually on the shotgun. And what I've worked out on the shotgun is that the shotgun's far enough away from all the distraction and clutter from the other lures. So they can come in on left or right. It doesn't seem to make any difference, and that's pretty consistent.
Okay.
I've also tested that with live baits, and they do it exactly the same.
Okay. So thoughts on autopilots? I think you got reasonably strong thoughts on autopilots, Steve.
Yeah, I think an autopilot's a wonderful tool to have from going to A to B when you're not fishing.
Yeah.
I think you will get a lot more bites, and you'll raise a lot more fish by doing, let's call them Sbends, moving the boat left to right. And the reason being is that you don't want your lures straight running. You want the lures to be able to puff, smoke, and roll slightly. So by doing big sweeps back and forward, you'll raise a lot more fish. I quite often, when I've got a new client on board, I tell them straight away, you'll notice that I'm moving the boat left and right. I'm not drunk. It's actually the way that I fish. And it certainly does improve the ability to raise fish, no question.
Yeah. And trolling speeds for blues versus stripies, what's your thoughts on that? It's a question that's just popped up on the comment section.
Right. Well, when we put Real Passion on the water way back in '98, we trolled at about 8.5. Sort of, that was pretty normal. We caught lots of stripies, and we also got blues. We started after we came back from the islands. We started trolling a little bit faster. So quite often I'm doing 8.5 to 9. And on absolutely dead still days, I'll do 9, 9.5.
But that's going to be boat size dependent, though, isn't it?
Yeah, yep. But it's obviously weather dependent and all that sort of thing. But I don't try and spend too much of my valuable trolling time going with it. I spend most of my time going into it or through the trough. Obviously every now and again you've got to go with it, but you'll find that if you avoid as much as you can going with it, you'll get more bites. And the reason being, especially in smaller boats. I was going to ask a question on that. Yeah, just especially in smaller boats, you sort of get a surging, especially when you've got a following sea behind you. And that surging, you've got to remember, is if you're getting lots of bill wraps and that, it's not so much that you're doing something wrong. It's just that the marlin, when they actually have made a decision to attack, it's a split second, and then the boat does a little bit of a surge. That increases the risk, obviously, of doing bill wraps and getting foul hooks. So if you can go into it and through the trough, then you might find that you get a lot more activity.
Nice. So one thing that I thought was quite interesting in the book was your comments around previously hooked fish, and just a few anomalies that you experience with some fish versus others. Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure.
I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah. Once you hook up a blue and he does his stuff, 9 times out of 10, when he settles down, he'll head north, and it's reasonably predictable. So you can actually get a lot of line back with little effort if you understand the principle of that. And then there's these blues that everything that you do, they counter, and it's not normal. And I sort of came to the conclusion that these sods have actually been caught before. they know how to bust off. They do beautiful figure eights. 1 minute they're 100 meters behind you, and the next minute they're right alongside the boat, and cutting across your transom or cutting in front of you. I'm pretty sure that they've actually been caught before, and quite often when I've got a very active fish, I record as much as I can during the fight what this fish does, and it's not all the time, but on certain fish that kick your butt, I'm pretty sure that they've been caught before. Maybe that's why they're a bit smarter.
Yeah, very interesting. So just on that, because when we were talking about, those fish that head north, I think that's quite an interesting one. I hadn't picked up on that one before. I'm not sure if others out there had. If anyone out there that's listening tonight has picked up on that, I'd be really interested to hear, and certainly keep an eye out for it. But you picked up on that because you kept track of your GPS tracks. Is that what
Yeah,
happened, Steve?
yeah, pretty much. When I get a strike, no matter what it is, I mark it. So I mark the strike and it's color coded.
Mm,
And then when I've caught the fish, I mark it again as a caught fish. And then I take that data back and I look at the data. And what I found with the blue marlin is that a huge percentage went north.
mm,
And that's once they settle down. They'll do, like the normal sort of figure eights and all over the place. But when they settle down, they find a cold thermocline, they'll head north. So I think it's something to do with um, their sort of homing device that they have,
mm.
and it's basically sort of magnetic, I guess. So they head north, and if you know that, especially on a very very stubborn fish, or if he goes very very deep, just go north, head north. Um, in particular, if it dies on you, if you can work out that he's dead on you, and then if it's sort of like 800 meters out and you've got a really good blue on and he's died on you, you've got to make absolutely sure which way the current's running. So
Yep.
throw a bit of stuff in the water if you have to, and then work the fish up. We've caught some very big blues, and we got much stronger currents than you have here in New Zealand, and we've caught some very good blues on like 24, 320 kilo plus fish on 24 without busting off, just by understanding the technique. Um,
Mm.
it's not difficult.
And interestingly, you just don't have blues dying on you up in Tonga, do you?
Very rare to
Mm,
have a blue die on us. I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that we're in very, very deep water for a start. So they 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 seem to be a little bit more active on the surface in the islands. Occasionally they go deep, but they don't go too deep. But also, I'm not sure if we've got any spawning grounds either. I think
mm,
spawning has a big impact on blue marlin populations. When that year that we caught 16 blues in New Zealand waters, I think something like 12 died on us. We couldn't believe it. Some of the fights were only sort of like 15 to 20 minutes. Uh,
mm.
so I guess that maybe it's related to, in New Zealand waters, the average size blues most likely sort of 180 plus,
Mm,
and it's amazing that no one seems to catch male blue marlin in New Zealand waters. We certainly never.
mm.
So I think maybe somewhere in the Pacific before they come into New Zealand, they've actually got a spawning ground. And if they were spawning, they may be a little bit out of condition. And of course, when they arrive in New Zealand, they've got a barrage of Kiwi anglers chasing them. And they just don't seem to have the same stamina.
Yep.
And that may be related to spawning. I mean,
Mm.
I can't prove that, but it seems logical to me.
Okay. Hey, well, let's kind of move on to the big rethink around lure rig development and bits and pieces. I think that was pretty interesting. How you kind of looked at what was happening with marlin video and bits and pieces, and you looked at that stiff rig development, hook angles and
Yeah,
bits and pieces, and we've got some pretty good graphics and some graphs on some of the results that you had with quite a few marlin. So I think we might start having a look at that. So how did that happen? What were the kind of those results that happened? The stiff rig development, why
right.
you had that semi-stiff rig, etc.
Okay.
What was
I think the stimulus was actually wanting to catch more fish, drop less, and it came down. Like we thought we had our speed right. we thought that the lures themselves seemed to be raising fish, but our hookup rate was not too good. So you have to concentrate purely on the actual hook rig itself.
Yep.
And a lot of our initial hookups with blues were sort of outside the mouth area in soft tissue, and we're playing it for 10 minutes, and of course the hook pulls, and we're going, holy shit, like. So we wanted to develop a rig where we get nice, clean hook mouth rig, so that we're actually hooking them inside the mouth as opposed to in soft tissue. And I came to the conclusion very quickly after looking at all the video and stuff that we had, and also all the results, because I record all fish where we drop them, and every fish that comes along, I record exactly where the hook is in the fish, and that's invaluable information. And there was just too many on the outside, and the only reason it was on the outside is because it's been hit, and you've got a 50-50 chance. Well, 50-50 chance for the blue marlin is not good enough. So we started developing a stiff rig, and it took a while to perfect it. We wanted, obviously, to have materials that were easily bought, not too expensive. And I tested every stainless steel rod that man has made. Most of them were too soft. And then, quite by accident, I broke a throttle cable, and inside the throttle cable, obviously, is a nice stainless steel rod, and it's specially heat treated, and that's the best one that I've found.
Okay.
Now,
you're using a solid cable.
Yep, it's a solid cable.
Rod.
It's not
Okay.
seven strand wire. Okay,
right.
So basically we started testing it, and our hookup rate went up and up and up and up. So now we're sitting around that sort of 80-81%. Occasionally we do 83. And the rig has been time tested. It's quite interesting. I was a guest speaker at the Miami Boat Club, and had a lot of professional captains from all around the world there, and we've got the opportunity of talking for about 5 to 10 minutes on something that works in our particular backyard. So I took along the stiff rigs, and did a little presentation on them, and everyone said, "Oh, I don't like the idea of doing that. Putting the wire inside there with the mono and crimping it. Do they break?" And I said, "No, they don't break. And I'm catching sort of 120 odd blue marlin in a normal season. So I had about 20, which I gave out to various people that run, charter operations around the world. Anyway, about 3 weeks later, after the Miami Boat Show, I got a call from the editor saying, "Can you do an article on the stiff rig?" I've had all these captains call me up and saying that their hookup rates have gone from 60 to 80%. So, it works well. And I mean, there's an old saying is that if you're catching fish, you don't change things. But if you're not happy with what you're doing, give it a go.
Yep.
I'm delighted with it. I still try refinements and all that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, the stiff rig for me delivers the promise. And I think the most important aspect, especially for any billfish, is if you can get a clean mouth hookup, the chance of losing that fish is very small. You'd have to bust off, basically. So that makes it pretty easy. Because of the power and the strength of both striped marlin and blues, obviously, if it's on the outside of the mouth area and soft tooth, they just tear it out. So it's
so what I'm going to do. What I'll do, Steve, is I'll just pop up a couple of graphics. So we've got this one. So this is your lure hook rigs. So I mean, you do run twin hook rigs from time to time. You do run a soft single hook rig.
Yep.
When you run that soft single hook rig, you're running it because
I run. My preference is the stiff rig, but there's certain lures that don't handle it for a start. It doesn't. They just don't run well. But I run a what we call a semi-stiff rig, especially when marlin are billing. They'll come up and they'll whack the lure. especially with some of the earlier video stuff we had, they had no intention of biting. You know, they weren't rolling and pitching; they were just whacking it.
Yeah.
So we actually had a semi-stiff rig with a swing hook on it, and our hookup rate improved. Still not to the level of a stiff rig, but we were dropping fish. So the sort of semi-stiff is, you know, works pretty well. I personally don't run many double hook rigs. I don't like them for two reasons. One, they're very dangerous for the crew, and also they can do a lot of damage to a fish. It's about 50-50 internationally in terms of, you know, skippers running singles or doubles. When I do run doubles, they're very big lures. They're usually sort of 28-inch sort of skirt lures, and I have to run a double rig purely for balance. But I guess, you know, if you're having success with either, just keep refining what you're doing, basically. But
absolutely.
You've got to have more than just one up your sleeve. You've got to have a couple or maybe 3 or 4 different techniques. Yeah.
All right. So what we'll do now is just run into so the adapted offset stiff rig setup. Did we cover that previously, or should we just
pretty much
recover that? Yep.
Yeah, so we've pretty much covered it. That's just using a stiff rig. One thing I should mention: if you're going to run a stiff rig or any sort of semi-stiff rig, you need to have a lure that's got a grommet so you can lock the actual hook rig into it. And so when we're running our stiff rigs on our normal pattern, we've got 10% offset running into the wash. Basically, that's what it is. And you've got a better chance of getting a hook up because the sweep and bite process, you're taking advantage of what they're doing in terms of their normal attack procedure. So you might find that your hookup rate, you know, increases dramatically.
And what's your favorite hook? Have you got multiple preferences or a standard?
I've run lots of different hooks, you know, mustards, etc. I think that my hook of preference now is certainly Voodoo.
Yep.
They're a Japanese hook, very high quality. I've bent just about every hook that man's made on good blues, and I haven't ever bent one on a Voodoo. They're very good, and they're not overly expensive, which is good.
Okay. All right. So just in terms of your bite and strike process, when a fish comes in, what's your process on your charters? So like strike, like what are you setting your strikes at? That type of stuff.
Okay. Every day I run a couple of 60 kilo, and I even do that in New Zealand because I'm always sort of hopeful that I might get that big girl. So I run a couple of 60 kilo and 37s and 24s, and if tournaments maybe it's 15 or whatever. But I run very.
Would you be running your 60s on the corners or the
Yeah.
outsides, or Yep.
I'd be putting my 60 kilo gear on the short corner and long flat, and a couple of 37s on the riggers, and maybe a 24 on the shotgun. And I run a pretty standard sort of W type pattern. Now, the reason I run very light drags is that I run a standard sort of outrigger system. I can run two lures off the poles at 2 different positions, and I use a rubber band. I love a rubber band, and I run just number 32s.
Yep.
And if I was to give you a 32 and you take it and double it and try and break it, you know, you need 15 to 17 kilos to actually, you know, break the thing. So I like a rubber band because it just gives a little bit more ability to actually set the hook point. Because if you don't set the hook point on strike, you're never going to catch him. He might just be holding the lure, and he'll drop it after 10 minutes. How many times have we heard, you know, like, yeah, I'm hooked up, and then 10 minutes later, I pulled the hook. Well, quite often you're not pulling the hook; you're not even hooked. So really like drags. Let them run, and get your angler sorted out, either stand up or in the chair or whatever. Don't panic; just let him run. As he starts to slow down, depends on how the skipper runs his boat, whether he turns the boat around and runs them down or backs up. But same sort of principle. If it's straight behind the boat, try and get a bit of a curve if you can, because that helps with the line pressure. Always keep a little bit of pressure on, and then slowly work the drag. And then as you're slowly working the drag, you can go, if you've got confidence in your rigs, you can go sort of right up to sort of whatever, even sunset if you have to on some fish. I don't fish a lot of sunset because it would be pulled over the side of the boat.
but on a 37, you'd maybe push it back up to 12 just to kind of set things down, and then just drop
12,
it back again.
12, 13, 14. I wouldn't go much more than that. It's surprising if you've got a mobile boat, you can get a lot of line back without having to take undue risk. And then one of the things that I've always done is looked very carefully at my positioning of lures, and I've ended up with a pattern on my boat, which I think is pretty consistent year after year. I catch 31% of all my marlin on the shotgun. On my port side, I run a teaser, and I get 7% more bites on my port side than I do on my starboard side. So to test that, I run the teaser on the starboard side, and those same similar results happen. So on my long rigger on the port side, I get something like 28% of my marlin, and then on the long flat, 13%. On my short corner, 10%, and then on the long rigger on the starboard side, 24%. And it's consistent. So if you know that, you can actually use that sort of background and that data to specifically use a particular lure that's maybe doing better than something else. So you can always test things. But if you know your catch rates, then it does help. One thing that I've found is, like anything, 20% of your lures will catch 80% of your fish. So I run 5 lures, and 2 of them will be active all day. But what I don't do is I don't change the other lures. And the reason I don't change the other lures is that quite often I notice that when the marlin come into the gear, they'll actually focus on one, and they'll sort of go left to right slowly, left to right slowly, come up maybe closer to another lure. And sometimes I call those lures the non-biters. They never ever bite, but they actually have an ability to actually create interest. So don't just willy-nilly change lures. Keep a pattern consistent. Write all the data down, and over a period of time, you'll be a lot more successful in terms of raising fish with the right spread at the right time.
Yep. So for a newbie coming in and buying a boat and wanting to get out there and get into it, are there any kind of little key suggestions that you might give someone to get out there and get into it and try and develop a pattern? I know that's a $1 million question, but
I think when you first get a boat, and you want to go game fishing, the first thing you need, you've got to run poles, outriggers. It gives the advantage to the fish in a way, because what you're doing is you're wanting to run your lures slightly in clear water. Now, interesting enough, with all my video stuff, most of the marlin that came up through the wash, they use the wash for camouflage. So don't drop your outriggers way out and have all your lures in absolutely clear water. It's better to have it close to wash, and you'll notice that you'll raise more fish, and you'll most likely see more fish too. And then you've got to test the best place on the wave face, specific to your boat and what sort of stern wash that your boat has. And that takes a little bit of time, but you don't need to run you know, 4 or 5 lures to start off with. You can run 3. You know, do a shotgun, certainly worthwhile. Do a shotgun and, you know, a couple of riggers and maybe a teaser. I would, on a small boat, I'd always sacrifice 1 lure for a teaser to actually test the teaser. You know, it's a learning curve. You know, like, it's good to talk to people and then apply it, but when you first start out, you need to make a few notes because you'll never remember. There's so many dynamics that we deal with on the water. But, you know, if you do it in a sort of like a persistent way and record what you do, there's a very, very good chance that you will shorten the learning curve. And you know, like, I've caught a lot of fish, but I'm still learning. And you know, we get our ass kicked every now and again, and I have a bit of a chuckle actually, because you know, they're majestic fish, and they're just wonderful to play. You know, like, so if you want to play lots of fish, do your homework. Yeah.
Yep, and don't be scared to get out there and invest a bit of money and go out with some good charter skippers. I mean, that's where you're going to learn, is watching what the professionals are doing. You know, I'm learning to fly fish. I'm not going to go out there and flail the right way by myself. I go and, you know, I go out with a guide and learn from the best, and then I go out and flail away by myself.
Well, I have a lot of first-time clients that come and they're up front. And they just say, look, you know, like, we've got a boat. We seem to be dropping a lot of fish, and we just don't, you know. I go, great, you know, come on, and I let them be part of the crew, so that they learn. You know, they give them a shot on the leader, let them do some lures. It's all part of that learning thing, and it's invaluable. So. Really good.
All right. So just look, we've got this prize that we have got, the Big Owl with the Blumo skirt and cap for the best question to be asked this evening. So we've got that coming up soon. So get those questions rolling. So just a couple of quick questions that are coming through. Joshua Davis has asked, vessel harmonics, how big a part do they play, or how much of a critical part are they in success rates, do you think, Steve?
Very much. Yep. Harmonics, I personally believe, are very important. And you know, when you're spending a lot of time on the water, you can hear all sorts of things going on that other people don't hear on your boat. And I think one tournament we were fishing pretty well, and then I could hear something, and I couldn't quite work out what it was, and I didn't follow my instincts. And what had happened is that the sacrificial anode on my shaft had got loose, and it actually spun up, and it was spinning around on the metal, and we didn't get a bite for 2 days. So harmonics and creaks and noises and all that sort of thing are very important. One thing that I've found on every boat that I've ever run is that it's almost impossible to get both if you're running twins, to get them both in sync properly. They might sync in terms of revs, but the noise is different. So I listen a lot to the engine, and I will run the boat accordingly. Quite often I'll have 50 to 60, even up to 100 revs difference, either port or starboard engine, to get the right noise. I've made a few other adjustments, like on my current boat. I ripped out the standard exhaust and I put underwater exhaust on it, and made a big difference. I changed the whole dynamics. So yeah, it is important, and your running gear is the thing that you got to watch too. Also, is that you can have a prop that's not quite balanced, and it cavitates a little bit and collects a little bit of air just on the cusp, and that's enough to annoy the fish. And if you have also some bad electronics or a really bad shorts, quite often that'll have an impact on fish. It's not just the line in the water, it's the whole package. So you've got to pay a lot of attention to the noise, how the boat goes in the water, make sure that you haven't got loose, you know, banging and clacking going on. And if you hear anything that's unusual, investigate it.
Yeah,
because
bad
quite often
bearing.
it's something. Yeah, bad bearing in the gearbox or whatever. Yeah, very important, Josh. So yeah.
Sam Corbin, for you personally, when do you throttle back the boat after the bite?
Okay. It depends on the individual fish, but I very rarely start backing up until the fish starts to settle down. By that time we might have maybe 100 meters out, and the fish is going ballistic. If it's a much bigger fish, I'll go a bit earlier, but quite often I will be backing up while the gear is still being cleared. Okay. And also, don't be afraid to turn the boat around. Quite often, you get into a backing mode, and you think that's the only way to go. I've lost a couple of fish, good fish, by not being responsive enough, and spin the boat around and hammer it if you have to. But basically, every fish is a little bit different. But you don't want the fish, especially in New Zealand waters. I note that they tend to be on the surface a bit, and they do run a lot of line out before they go deep. You want to try and stay as close, as comfortable as you can. Yeah, go hard if you have to. Absolutely.
Just another quick one from Sam, which ties in with another question from me. What's your top 5 lures?
Top 5 lures. Oh, that's okay.
This could get
I have to
political.
say that a bit. I have to say that it's great to be able to support New Zealand lure makers. We've got
totally.
some great lure makers in New Zealand. I would say that my top manufacturers. So I'll come to lures later. Top manufacturers, certainly Bonds is there. We've got our FG. I'll just make a little note. Okay, top lures that I've run in the last season is Bonds Hercules. Okay. Also Bonds Grimmel. Red Gill 4, a Red Gill 8, and then a favourite of mine is the Fathom Pepple Grundy. Okay, that's the other thing on your spread with your lures. If you're going to be chasing more Blue Marlin, use more angle face lures. It'll create a lot more clutter. I run a concave only in one position on my boat, and that's the long flat, and it's very successful. But those sort of lures there will catch you both sort of striped marlin as well as blues.
You have run a lot of the Bobby Browns and those types of things as well, though, haven't you? So.
Well, yeah, Bobby Brown is still my absolute favourite, and I go to Bobby Brown when things aren't going too well. I think I've caught something like 170 odd Blue Marlin on Bobby Brown now. It's a very versatile lure, but in Tongan waters it doesn't last too long because of bloody wahoo.
Right,
they chop them to bits pretty quick. But yeah, Bobby Brown's good. I love Bobby Brown, and also I run wide range. I think after a while you end up with a group of top performing lures, and the key is using them in the right conditions. I don't think I've ever found one lure that will run in every condition. So you've got to mix and match, and the only way that you know that is by writing down and collecting the data. And if you can collect the data, you'll soon work out what's good and the reasons why.
So Neil Browning asks, if you had twin outboards, should you troll with both or one?
Well, I think trolling with both is most likely an advantage, to be honest. You don't unless you're sort of chopping and changing to keep your hours nice and even. But I think running with 2 motors is pretty sensible. You're creating a lot more exhaust noise. and I think that's important. And also, if you need to respond a bit faster with that really, big blue of a lifetime, having twin engines up and running, I think is a big advantage.
Yeah.
Believe it or not.
On. Yeah, no, carry on. Sorry.
I was just going to say, like I run diesels, and they're reasonably responsive, but I can tell you we've had big Blue Marlin doing a dance around the boat, and we've done like 3 and 4 complete 360s under full power, and the Blue's still got the edge. So
yeah, totally.
If you've got the power, don't be afraid to use it. Yeah.
Lars Christensen asks, is speed as important as lure action? For example, always troll at 7 knots. And I think this probably kicks in when you've got really strong currents. You might be doing 7 knots across the current, but then you turn into the current and you might drop down to 4 knots, but the lure is still working really, really well. What are your thoughts on that?
I think if you've got your boat set up and you're trolling and the harmonics are sounding really good and the lure's working, I don't change my my revs much at all. I keep pretty much consistent. I don't think you have to go through a different rev range, providing the lure is pumping in what it's supposed to be doing. Yep. Because bear in mind, the fish is also swimming in that environment too. It's like going into the current. I'll give you an example. When we go up to Samoa, at the top of the Tonga Trench, we're doing 9 knots, and we come down to 4. And it's like just pea soup, and we still catch fish in that environment. So no, I don't think you honestly have to change your pitch as long as you've got the boat going nice and the lures are working.
Yep, perfect. All right. So Tim and Araha O'Leary, will the amount of boats fishing the same area affect hookup rates? For example, having 10 or more boats fishing one area versus 1 or 2 boats, will this affect hookup success, do you think?
Well, I think I learned a long time ago, more the merrier. If you've got a general area where you've got lots of boats working, that's great, honestly. You've got to remember that quite often marlin, they're in transit, but they're also in holding patterns. And if you've got, someone hooks up and there's a few other boats and they're hooking up, don't bugger off. Stay around there, because you'll find that there's more marlin there. So I welcome as many boats around me as possible. It all helps.
Yep, perfect. Samantha, would you recommend running 5 lures on a small boat or just 3 with teasers?
It depends on your crew, obviously, but I think for let's say for the general sort of family unit, I'd run 3 and a couple of teasers.
Yep, perfect.
They're a lot easier, and manual teasers. I mean, I'll give you an example. I do a lot of solo fishing myself in my boat. I run maximum of 3, quite often 2, and it makes absolutely no difference to the number of fish that I raise. So don't think that because you're not running an extra couple of lures that you're going to miss a fish. If you run a couple of teasers, you're doing the same. In fact, you're mostly creating more activity.
Yep, it's more
and it's a lot easier to clear. A lot easier to clear if you than you've got like 5 rods out. So yeah.
Ashley asks, what SST service do you use? Do you use one at all, or?
Yeah, rip charts. I know that it can be a little bit expensive at times, but rip charts certainly help. I think it takes a little bit to get to understand how to read rip charts, and there's lots and lots of good videos on YouTube and stuff on interpreting charts and stuff. I tend to concentrate I'm looking at certainly on temperature breaks. I really like to look at temperature breaks, and then the next thing that I look at is chlorophyll, especially on those breaks. What you can do, like let's say today is Monday and you're going to go fishing on Saturday, you should look every night, spend half an hour and actually track the warm water. You can track the warm water, so you've got 5 days of looking into it, and then Saturday, on Friday night, you've actually said, well, that's where it is, and the average distance it's been travelling is 8 miles overnight or 14 miles. I'm going to make a new mark of 14 miles here. It should be going there, and then go to that place. Don't be sucked into stopping unless you've got lots of bird life or whatever. Go to that place, find those temperature breaks and work them. There's no question that big fingers of hot water, they're loaded with fish, and you've got to remember that no matter what part of the web that you are involved in, there's lots and lots and lots of other species involved. Pay attention to temperature breaks, and in Tonga it's very easy because our water is just crystal blue and purple, and if we get a couple of degrees change, we can tell straight away. Visually we can see them. Our water temperatures are in winter is sort of 22, and in summer it can get up to 31. So yeah, certainly do your homework on the charts. It will help you a lot.
Cool. All right, lucky last from Jason. Have you ever had a double or triple on blues, Steve?
I've had a quadruple.
Ooh, even better.
I've had 2 quadruples and managed to get 3 both times.
Wow.
But I think if I remember my stats, we've had something like sort of 45 doubles and about 30 odd trebles. A few times we've got 3. One of the techniques you can use when you get a double is if you've got the ability to back your boat up, is actually back up and split them. That's the easiest way of doing it. And then you have to make a decision what fish you're going to concentrate on. So you've got a 50-50 chance, But yeah, no, they're good. We call them sort of Walt Disney Productions when we get multiple fish on. A lot of fun. And it's pretty important that if the rods start getting pretty close, that you can have someone that actually looks so you can actually start going under and over. Otherwise, you'll end up busting off. Yeah.
Excellent. Just one last one, which I think is just a bit of a highlight of some of the information that's come out, was around that whole drag setting thing. I know most guys out there are setting drags at around 1/3 of line weight at strike, and I really encourage people to have a play with that lighter drag setting for stripies and for blues, and give it a go, because what do you think the key reasons for giving that where's he gone? Hopefully he'll pop back in a second. So anyway, just talking about it, just give it a go, guys. So Steve's talking about having, here we go, just going to add him back.
Oh, there we are. I don't know what happened. I had a little bit of hiccup there.
So Steve, you're talking about setting your strike drag at or about kind of 3 kg, aren't you, for stripies and things?
Yep. Now bear in mind that the reason I can do that is I'm using a rubber band off my stinger, so the rubber band's taking all the weight. Okay. Really nice light drag. Now bear in mind that the fish comes in, grabs the lure and takes off. Okay. If they feel a lot of resistance, they'll go harder, especially blues. And I think the mistake that a lot of new fishermen make is they start looking at the line peeling off and they start putting the drag up. I do the opposite. If it really starts to take off, I actually even let it go and almost into free spool. And you'll get a lot of fish actually slow down when they stop feeling that drag. It's easier on light drag to then increase your drag as you've got control on the fish. It's near impossible to actually do it the other way. You'll end up busting off, or the fish will just go mental. So light drags, I personally believe are a very good part of becoming a better catcher.
So it's not about having to have that hook set at the point that they bite the lure. It's a matter of getting the fish to turn away, grab the lure in its gob, and be turned in the right direction to then slowly take the drag up to then be able to set the hook.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, there's been a few studies on bite pressure from various marlin. You know, when you've got a 12 burrow hook and it can actually sink it right through the toughest part of the bill, you know, you're talking about incredible pressure. Well, that's bite pressure. That's not drag pressure. That's bite pressure. So quite often you'll get the hook point and the bite simultaneous. And if you can do that, you've got a much better chance of getting a clean mouth hookup. A lot of the hookups that we get running our stiff rig is through the top of the pellet. And I can assure you that when it goes through the top of that pellet, it ain't coming off. The only way that fish is going to get away is if you actually bust off.
And this is why you're getting these 80% catch rates,
I mean,
and you're not getting the bill wraps and the drop fish an hour into a fight.
You know, we still have our nightmare days. You know, no question about that. You know, we drop every bloody fish, or you know, have a few bust offs. But in general, when you look at, you know, like month on month and season by season, you can see the consistency, and you've got to work out what's actually making it consistent. And it's usually the fine tuning that you do, in particular to your hook rigs and the lures that you're running.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, look, we're going to wind this up. So we've got a prize to give away. And Steve, from the questions that we asked, was there one that stood out that you think could be worthy of tonight's prize?
I think so. I think it's Samantha by a mile.
So Samantha's was, would you recommend running 5 lures on a small boat or just 3 with teasers? There you go. Samantha, you're the winner. So Samantha, if you can, if we can get your details somehow, if you can, how are we going to do that, Kieran? We'll be able to do that through the comments section, I take it, or you can email, message us separately, and we'll get that out to you. So congratulations. And Steve, thank you very much for the time you spent with us tonight. That's been absolutely outstanding. So hopefully everyone's got some really good info out of that. That's been brilliant. So thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
We'll be back to you soon with our next speaker or guest. And thank you very much for joining us tonight. And we'll be back to you soon. So have a great evening and all the best with the fishing out there. And just remember, we've got the promo with Hunting and Fishing North Shore. So get in there to do that, and I think that's about it. Kieran, anything else? No? Okay, excellent. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you soon. Wonderful. Have a good night. Thanks, Steve.
Catch you later. Ciao.